Hi, this is Ed, and welcome to episode 2 of Cracking the Codex Adeptus Mechanicus. This week we're going to be looking at the Rad-zone Corps. How are you feeling about this one, John?
Despite it being the index one, I have very little opinion of it because I never
Mm.
played against it. But all I know is I've seen a lot of breaches in it previously, so I'm
Well,
curious
that's
whether that's a
because it's an
thing.
AdMech army, so you'll be seeing a lot of breaches in pretty much every list, but you're absolutely correct. My estimation of this has gone up significantly since the detachment went from being the index detachment to being the Codex detachment. I like some of the changes there. I think it's a good generalist all rounder, and it's got some great tools for the key units that you're going to see in AdMech. So, what do you get in the Rad-zone Corps? First of all, you get Rad Bombardment. This was a joke when it came out in the index. To be fair, it actively buffs Sisters of Battle, which is not necessarily something that you want to be doing, especially at this point in the meta, but it has been improved. So now, at the start of the first battle round, for each enemy unit within your opponent's deployment zone, your opponent must choose to either stand firm or take cover. Stand firm on a 3+, the unit takes D3 mortal wounds. Take cover until the end of the battle round, that unit is battle shocked. No test, they're just automatically battle shocked. Then you roll a 5 up, and that unit also takes D3 mortal wounds. This means that it's actually a decision, whereas before it was just a case of everything's battle shocked and nothing takes any damage. I wasn't going to use any strats on them anyway. This one unit needs to do a strat. It's fine. Now, even if you decide to be battle shocked to try and prevent the early damage, there's still a risk that you take damage. A third of your units effectively will take some mortal wounds. Then, from battle round 2 on, at the start of your command phase, roll 1d6 for each enemy unit within your opponent's deployment zone. On the 3+, they take a mortal wound and must take a battle shock test. So, for any missions where you're trying to score, for example, hold 1, hold more, or if you've got to hold more than your opponent, or if you're trying to capture enemy outposts, for example, this is quite a strong tool to put more pressure on your opponent than they're comfortable with. It's one of those abilities that you're not particularly in love with yourself, but when your opponent plays against it, it causes them a lot of worry. How do you feel about this one?
So I like it because I was
Mm,
instantly thinking, if I'm playing, say, the Dark Angels Unforgiven detachment, do I
yes.
mind being battle shocked? And then in reality, yes, because even though you still have OC,
Yeah.
you want to be able to do your armor of contempt, your defensive stratagems like that. So it's just like no one ever wants this to happen to them. So yeah, chances are you're going to be taking D3 mortal wounds per unit, and that can do a lot to negate the survivability of a lot of armies. Apart from someone say like Necrons, where they do regenerate. Outside of that, it's some
Yes.
permanent damage, right? And that's not nice.
Yes. No, I having played into AdMech with this detachment, I was incredibly not bothered. I took some damage at the start of the first battle round. I immediately healed up. Everything was great. There are a couple of things to note here. This is only deployment zone. There is an enhancement that increases the range of the area that you have to take tests on models on. This doesn't count for the start of the first battle round. It only increases the aura at the start of the first battle round for sorry, not for the start of the first battle round. It increases the aura for turns 2 onwards. So if you have any units that are infiltrate or have scouted out of the deployment zone, then you don't have to take any tests there. Stratagems. I would say one of the main strengths of this detachment is the stratagems. Very similar to the Awakened Dynasty from Necrons. It's the index detachment. It's got stratagems that really do a lot of the heavy lifting and are applicable to a lot of units, which I find very powerful, very useful. First of all, we've got 4 battle tactics. In this army, unfortunately, battle tactic is not so much of an advantage. You could put, I believe, a Skitarii Marshal in with some Vanguard or Rangers, make a strat free, then bounce it. It's more points. You can't bounce your stratagems to the breaches, unfortunately. So realistically, you're just going to be paying the full cost and putting it on the unit that you want in general, with the exception of maybe the aggressor imperative, but we'll get onto that one. First of all, Baleful Halo. 2 CP, fight phase. You select one AdMech unit excluding vehicle units, and you are -1 to wound in combat. This is one way you can put it on a battle line unit and bounce it to a Skitarii unit, but again, just to reiterate, that doesn't include the breaches. So if you're trying to keep your breaches alive, use the strat on them specifically. If you're trying to keep the multiple squads or the battle line and then maybe Taraxi alive, you could bounce it there. Aggressor Imperative, 1 CP. This is your movement phase. This is probably the best stratagem in the detachment, and it really sort of pushes me towards wanting to put multiple squads of the Dragoons with Taser Lancers in. The way this works is your movement phase, you pick one Skitarii unit from your army that has not been selected to move. Again, you can bounce it from a battle line to another Skitarii unit. You get a flat 6-inch advance on that unit or both units if you bounce it. Fantastic.
Nice.
This gives you Sidonian Dragoons with a 16-inch move that can then advance and charge just on their data sheet. Really powerful, really good aggressive unit, quite cheap for what it does. Not the highest output, but that sort of threat range does make people really have to sit back and think about their screening and how they position. Moving on, we've got pre-calibrated purge solutions. Say that 6 times fast. In your shooting phase, you select one AdMech unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot. Again, you can put it on a battle line and bounce it to a Skitarii unit. Breaches are not Skitarii. You're just going to put it on the Skitarii themselves. The breaches themselves. And until the end of the phase, each time a model in one of those units makes an attack, if they target a unit that is in your opponent's deployment zone, you can re-roll the hit roll. It doesn't have to be wholly within. So if your breaches are shooting at something that's trailing into your opponent's deployment zone, partially in, or just, some sort of heavy vehicle, you get the full rerolls to hit. Very useful if you're fishing for the sustained hits, brought with the characters, the Tech Priest Manipulus, or if you're fishing for the lethal hits that you can get from another stratagem later in this detachment. It is a little bit pricey to be using every turn, because you probably also want to look at using lethal dosage every turn with your shooting, but it's a great one to have in your back pocket. Finally, in the battle tactics, we've got Bulwark Imperative. This is pricey. It's 2 CP. It's your opponent's shooting phase, just after an enemy unit has selected its target. Again, it's one of those you can put on a Skitarii battle line unit, bounce it to a Skitarii unit, which would include your Dragoons, doesn't include the breaches. So you're either putting it on Dragoons in general, or if they're near a character, if they're near a battle line unit, putting it on the battle line and bouncing it to the Dragoons. It doesn't go on the breaches. They're not Skitarii, so you can't put it on them at all. It does, however, give that unit a 4-up invulnerable save. So you're probably wanting to put your Dragoons on the line. This makes it a little bit less punishing on sort of the second turn. First turn, you're going to have to take the firepower because it is a 2 CP strat, but then moving forwards, it is something that you can potentially put on to keep your models safe as they spend more time out in the open. Finally, we've got another 2 stratagems. Neither of these 2 are battle tactics. We've got Extinction Order for 1 CP. In your command phase, you pick 1 Tech Priest from your army and 1 objective marker within 24 inches of that model. Doesn't have to be able to see it, just a 24-inch range. And you roll a d6 for each enemy unit within range of that objective marker. On a 4+, that unit takes a mortal wound and it must take a battle shock. I really like this stratagem. This is another one of those where you go, I don't feel like this is great for me, but your opponent sweats. You might not spend any CP on this stratagem, but you tell your opponent at the start of the game, I have this stratagem. If your opponent looks like they're going to leave a single model on there, you might even want to say, just to remind you, I have a 1 CP strat. I pick the objective marker, everything on it takes a battle shock and takes a mortal wound on a 4+. This makes people...
That combined with the detachment rule means 2 wound models disappear.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's D3 for the on turn 1 as well, so you can potentially put a lot of threat out. Realistically, it's a great stratagem to not have to spend CP on, that makes your opponent have to commit more firmly to their to the not the detachments, the objectives that they're holding. These AdMech, man, I'm saying so many words that just shouldn't be used in combination of each other.
It's so good.
Yeah. Finally, we've got Lethal Dosage. Again, this is an absolute all-star in this detachment. It is 1 CP. In your shooting phase, pick an Adeptus Mechanicus unit from your army that has not been selected to shoot this phase. You can't bounce this one. This is just a straight-up put it on a unit. Until the end of the phase, ranged weapons equipped by the models in your unit have the lethal hits ability. You're going to slam this on your breaches. If you're trying to wound something where you're going to be wounding on 4s, 5s, depending what you're going into. This is absolutely huge on breaches with arc rifles that are shooting into monsters, for example. If you're shooting into vehicles, you're probably pretty happy to just fish for the 4-up anti-vehicle. But if you're putting your shots into Catan, for example, you're going to be wounding on 5s. That's not great. Spend a CP, lethal hits, jobs are good. Really
Exactly.
valuable there. So a lot of stratagems that we've stumbled away through, but it is a really strong toolbox. It gives you movement tricks that you can use most obviously on the dragoons to get them aggressively up the board, but you can also just move your vanguard up the to where they're going to do teleport homers in the middle of the battlefield. It gives you damage output, it gives you defense in the bulwark imperative, and in the baleful halo, both of which are quite expensive, but it's a good toolbox to have. It's followed up by some pretty solid enhancements as well. First of all, radial suffusion. This one is top of the list because it interacts with your detachment rule in a way that I think makes it worth taking pretty much every time. The way it works, you put it on one of your characters, and from the second battle round onwards, when resolving the fallout effect of the Rad Bombardment Detachment rule, if the bear is on the battlefield, so you can't be in reserves, roll a d6 for each enemy unit within 6 inches of your opponent's deployment zone, not just the ones that are in the deployment zone. In plain English, what that means is when you're doing your detachment rule, you don't just pick your opponent's deployment zone, you move the line 6 inches closer to the center of the battlefield. This makes it quite hard to avoid. You can catch units that are turn 1, potentially turn 2, tagging the way up, turn 2, potentially turn 3, tagging onto objectives, but then stringing back a little bit. It makes the range actually quite large because it's a 6-inch band all the way across the map. How are you feeling about this one?
So, certain army styles will unpack mid to late game out of their deployment zone unless they. So, a good example is Iron Storm Space Marines
Sure.
will be quite defensive and cagey and then slowly come out. This forces them, for the cost of that, they need to actually come out a bit
Yeah.
earlier, forcing them. And then if that's not that, like that extra 6 inches, if it's things like 8-inch moving dreadnoughts, they're not getting out of that very quickly.
Yeah.
So you're probably getting a good 3 turns of that consistently into a big chunk of that army, which is terrifying because that negates -1 damage stuff. It's
Mm.
it's the sweet spot. That's the sort of tool I like to have in an army to negate survivable units that are generally -1 damage, half damage, all these sorts of things, or invuns, feel no pains, all that stuff. You're just getting past a lot of it
Yeah.
just by going mortal wounds, take them.
And especially if you're playing quite aggressively and you're trying to get fire lines, your opponent's tanky units, typically tanky units, tend to be a little bit slower, might be still within that line. If you're stopping your opponent from slamming Armor of Contempt when you shoot them with your entire army, suddenly that brick of Terminators might fall over when they wouldn't have done so before.
Yeah.
I think it's really valuable. It's hard to quantify in terms of raw output, but the effects that you have and how it changes the way your opponent has to play, I find very valuable. Next up, we've got Malphonic Susurrus, and when the bearer is leading a unit, models in that unit have the stealth ability. Just a flat -1 to hit. I think it's really good. You want to be playing relatively tanky models. There are some matchups where it's not going to matter so much. Like if your opponent's playing Einstorm Space Marines, they're playing lots of guns with full rerolls to hit because they're just going to oath a moment that unit if they want it to die anyway. But sometimes it makes all of your opponent's incidental firepower just that much less efficient. 15 points, I really like it. Peerless Eradicator, 15 points. When the bearer is leading a unit, ranged weapons equipped by models in the unit have sustained hits 1. This is great. This is the ability to just increase the output of your shooting on a breacher squad. Not exponentially, but significantly. You pair that with your full rerolls to hit strat if you're shooting at something in your opponent's deployment zone,
Yeah.
fish for the 6s. Potentially, you can put the ranged output of a breacher squad significantly higher. If you're in rapid fire range as well, things start to get silly, full knights start to fall over. Great enhancement to have at only 20 points. And Autoclavic Denunciation. This is 15 points. It's basically it gives you ranged weapons on the bearer, anti-infantry 2+ and anti-monster 4+. This sounds fine at the face of it. However, what you realistically are going to do, you're going to put it on the Tech Priest Manipulus. He's got a transonic cannon. It's a dev wound flamer, 12-inch range, d6 shots, strength 4, AP 0, 2 damage. I think it's funny. I think it's okay. I think the ranged output is okay. I like all 3 of the other enhancements much more.
Yeah.
So I think this is the one that I cut. However, if you want to run it and just have, an aggressive flamer, that can be quite valuable against some armies. For example, if you're playing into World Eaters and they're wanting to run berserkers at you, and you're saying, well, that's fine, but I've got a d6 shot flamer, and each 2+ will do 2 mortal wounds to you, 2 devastating wounds to you. That can be a nice little deterrent there. Then we have got a list. This is a fairly standard AdMech good stuff list. I think it'll be very similar to the one that we talked about with Jack a couple of weeks ago, but it is effectively, these are my good units. I'm going to hammer home on them. Here's my scoring units. I'm going to try and make you fold. I've got the rules to do it. I've got the models to do it.
Yeah.
Triple Manipulus. One of them's running the Susurrus, one of them's running Peerless Eradicator. That's your -1 to hit and your sustained hits on 6s for ranged weapons. So you're just looking to buff your defensive profile, buff your output where you can. And then we've got a third Manipulus who doesn't have an enhancement. We've also got the Engine Seer with Radial Suffusion. The Engine Seer is quite a nice unit. It gets Lone Operative if it stood within 3 inches of an allied vehicle unit, or model, I should say. And you can also give a vehicle in your command phase a 5-up Feel No Pain until the start of your next command phase. Key to note, this isn't vehicle unit, so you are putting it on a singular Dragoon, for example. It's not particularly the reason to take it, but it is nice just to make it slightly more difficult to kill the first Dragoon in a squad. And like all of the other tech priests, does heal vehicles that are nearby, although in this detachment you're not necessarily running the highest number of vehicles. Then we've got 3 squads of the Cataphront Breaches. Obviously you're running the Arc Cannons here, you're probably running the Arc Claws as well, just the most efficient output wise. Each of the Manipulus goes in a squad of those. Running 3 squads of 10 on the Vanguard. They're the cheapest battle line unit. They're just quite efficient to have. It's 10 25 mil bases, screens out a surprising amount of the board if your opponent's looking to do something like behind enemy lines or teleport homers. So they end up being more valuable than you'd think just on a pure datasheet basis. They also reduce toughness of nearby models, I believe, which can come up, especially if your opponent's playing quite aggressively and you're getting in the melee with the Sidonian Dragoons. Speaking of the Dragoons, there are 3 squads. There's a 3, a 3, and a 2. This is really leaning on the ability to give them a flat 6-inch advance. You're saying to your opponent, I'm going to deploy in the line. Either you come out, get shot, then get charged, or you play very cagey, at which point I win the game by scoring lots of points. And finally, you've got 2 squads of the Taraxi Skystalkers. These are a great scoring unit. They come in from deep strike, and they can fire and fade after shooting. So you can fire and fade onto an objective that your opponent hasn't screened out properly, or you can do some actions with them, even just use them to hold an objective, come in across the board from where you are with some of your slower models like the Cataphront Breaches. What are you thinking about this one, John?
It feels like a list that I would enjoy to play because it's got the tools that you'd normally expect in a typical 10th ed list. So it's got ways to play dynamically, it's got some good output on things like the Breaches, and it's got some good reach with the things like the Dragoons. I like that it's just, you push yourself forward, you play the game, but it's quite an honest version of the game.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a style of list I enjoy playing. It's one where you've got lots of the same unit, but each unit can be used in different ways. So, for example, the Manipulus that joins the Breaches with the Susurrus for -1 to hit, you might use differently to the one that has Peerless Eradicator to give them sustained hits. One of them's more tanky, one of them's got more output. And then the stratagem use as well gives you a toolbox there. Thank you for watching episode 2. That was the Rad cohort. We will be doing Data Psalm Conclave. We will be releasing one of these videos every day this week, Monday through Friday.